What is going on YouTube? It is your boy MrBaboon back with a reaction video. This time we have the Chicago Ripper crew. I do believe I said that correctly. But we're going to learn about this. I don't really know a whole lot about this, but I will have the link in the video down below in the description. If you guys do want to check it out, you guys can. So, we're going to react to this and learn about this. You know what I'm saying? Let's get right into it. Fast, let's go ahead and just like, subscribe, all that good stuff. You know what I'm saying?
To the crime reel. Hello and welcome back to the crime reel.
I like the intro. I don't have an intro on any of mine. Well, besides, you know, what I do all the time in the videos.
For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the truly horrific story of the brutal and sadistic cult that became known as the Chicago Ripper crew. To meet the first member of this crew, we need to go back to the early 1980s in Chicago, Illinois. At that time, 20-year-old Edward Spritzer was trying to make it on his own out in the world. His childhood had been marred by a neglective parent, bullying at school, and with an IQ of just 75 points, he had dropped out of high school before his third year. He was known around the community for being slow and uncoordinated, and by the age of 18, he'd been kicked out of his family home by his stepfather for causing a car accident. From there, Edward jumped from job to job, eventually getting employment at a Winchell's Donuts. It was here that he would meet a regular customer by the name of Robin GECHT. 8 years older than Edward, Robin's ties to the criminal world had already been firmly cemented by the time he met Edward. Robin was a tradesman who had learned his trade studying under the notorious John Wayne Gacy. He's the serial killer that is dubbed the Killer Clown. Robin would later go on to imply that John Wayne Gacy had only ever made one mistake in his life, and that was getting caught for his crimes. As if this tie to an already established serial killer wasn't enough to deter Edward from befriending Robin, Robin was also surrounded by dark rumours. There were some that claimed he'd assaulted his younger sister. There were others who claimed that he abused women, particularly his wife, and other claims that he would ask to stick pins and needles into women's breasts or cut their nipples off so he could see how they worked. One night, Edward found himself in need of Robin's help. Edward's car had broken down and he couldn't get home from work. Edward asked Robin if he would take him to pick up some tools so Edward could come back and fix his car. Robin kindly agreed. At some point during the journey, Robin suggested that they change their plans and pick up some whores instead. Edward agreed, and after reassurances from Robin that they wouldn't get into any trouble for what they were about to do, Edward followed Robin's suggestion to hide in the back of the van. By now, the plan was that Robin would find a girl that he liked, pick her up, and take her somewhere where the two men could take care of the whore. All Edward had to do was silently wait in the back of the van until he heard Robin tap twice. Robin picked up a 28-year-old mother of two named Linda Sutton, who took up Robin's offer both to spend a few hours with him and to partake in some of the pills that he had. By the time Robin had driven them out to a field near the Rip Van Winkle motel where Edward actually lived, Linda was barely conscious. Robin got out of the van, tapped twice, and Edward joined him by the passenger side door where he saw Robin holding a pair of handcuffs and a knife. Robin handcuffed Linda, pulled her out of the van and dragged her off to a nearby bushy area where he could have some privacy. He told Edward to go back and wait by the van until he called for him again. Edward could hear Linda moaning in pain but did not see what Robin was doing until Robin whistled to call him over. Robin had sliced off Linda's breast and was penetrating the wound left behind while Linda sat there, still handcuffed and helpless. Robin told Edward to get a wire from the back of the van and then to come back. Accounts differ as to who sliced off Linda's other breast with this wire, but either Robin or Edward mutilated Linda's right breast, and Robin showed Edward how he could assault the wound too. When the pair were finally done with her, they left Linda still lying behind the bushes, bleeding and barely conscious. It would take 10 days for Linda's body to be discovered, and even more disturbingly, the autopsy report revealed that Linda had only been dead for 3 days by then. Decomposition had occurred at an increased rate due to the massive wounds in her chest, but it had taken Linda over a week to succumb to them. Linda was the first of 18 official victims that would be killed at the cult's hands. Edward tried to avoid Robin in the weeks that followed Linda's murder, coming up with excuses as to why he couldn't join Robin on any more nighttime driving, but then Robin offered Edward a job at his construction company. Edward had been told several times by family members and long-time friends that he should learn a trade to better support himself in life. Eventually, after consulting with his family and only telling them half of the story, Edward officially joined Robin's crew of tradesmen. It was here that he met 2 more men, Andrew and Thomas Cocorales, who not only shared similar pasts, but also similar IQ scores as Edward. With his gang now complete, Robin began teaching them about the occult and showing them his way of worshipping Satan.
What the fuck?
Want to see something?
The breasts that he and his crew collected from the women they assaulted and murdered were all for a ceremony that Robin would perform up in the attic of his home on a satanic altar. This was decorated with 6 red pentagrams and a red cloth.
Bro,
The men
what?
would take turns masturbating into the breasts before Robin would cut chunks off and the men would eat them. What was then left of the breasts were put into a box that Robin kept on his altar. Later testimony from some of his crew claimed that at one point there were over 15 breasts in there.
What the
But
fuck?
even though he was the leader, to put all of the responsibility for the group's behaviour only on Robin's shoulders would be a stretch of the truth. Within a year of the gang coming together, the members were also acting on their own. Edward and Andrew abducted Lorraine Borowski on May the 15th, 1981. Lorraine was a 21-year-old woman on her way to open the estate agents where she worked when the 2 men threw her into the back of Robin's van. They assaulted her, cut off one of her nipples and stabbed her multiple times with what the coroner believed to be an ice pick.
What the
After Lorraine
fuck?
came Shui Mack, a 30-year-old woman on her way home from her job at her family's restaurant when she was offered a ride by Robin. Shui did not take any of the pills offered to her and put up a fight when Robin tried to handcuff her and pull her out of the front of the van. She was repeatedly struck in the face and ribs until she was dazed enough that Robin could drag her away to a more secluded area and assault her further. He cut off her breasts with a knife and then stabbed her several times in the abdomen before getting back into the van and leaving her there.
What the
As with many of the
fuck,
murders on the list, accounts differ as to who actually did what. Some of the crew claim that it was Robin who murdered Shui, while others claim that it was Edward. The prosecution would later argue that the amount of drugs the gang were taking and the large amount of similarities between each murder led them to constantly mix up specific names and events. Their next victim was Angel York, a 23-year-old woman from Chicago's North Side. She claims that she was abducted by Robin and forced into the back of his van, where he made her cut into her own breast with a knife. Unsatisfied by watching her mutilate herself, he grabbed the knife off of her, made the wound in her chest larger so that he could masturbate into it. He then sealed the wound with duct tape and threw her out of his van. Angel survived the attack and gave a statement to the police, including a description of Robin and his van, but unfortunately it did not lead to any arrests. The gang then waited 2 months to strike again. The body of 18-year-old Sandra Delaware was found on a bridge near the Chicago River bank. She had been stabbed, her left breast had been cut off, and she had died from a combination of blood loss and strangulation. According to Edward, he and Robin had been driving around when Robin spotted Sandra and told Edward to get into the back. Robin then solicited Sandra's services and drove away to the bridge, where he ordered her to take off her clothes and handcuffed her. He then assaulted her while he forced her to perform oral sex on Edward, but when Robin asked Edward if he was enjoying himself, and Edward answered that he wasn't, Robin told Edward to do something about it. Edward stabbed Sandra in the chest with his knife several times before he reportedly began to feel sick and went back to the van to wait for Robin. Edward described himself as feeling sick and going back to the van several times throughout his statements and testimonies, usually right before someone was either murdered or left to die. But who can say how much of that is true, or if he was just trying to push the blame and the responsibility of what had happened away from himself. Their next victim was a woman named Rose Beck Davis, a 30-year-old marketing executive from Broadview. Her body was found after she'd been sexually assaulted, beaten with an axe and stabbed to death. The coroners would later remove a 4-inch piece of wood from her vagina. From there, the group would make a break from their usual routine when Robin ordered Edward to stop the van on the street just beside a phone booth where 3 men were making a call. Robin picked up 2 guns and opened fire on the men, hitting 2 before the van sped off and the gang moved on to their next victim. This drive-by would leave 1 injured and 1 dead, and it marks Rafael Tirado, a 28-year-old drug dealer, as the gang's only known male victim. On the same day as this drive-by, the gang abducted an 18-year-old by the name of Beverly Washington.
Hey, welcome to the barber shop. We'll be with you shortly. Take your pants off. Started this place.
She got into the front of the van after Robin offered her extra money for her services. She then climbed into the back where Robin showed her that he had a gun. He then made her strip, handcuffed her, made her perform oral sex on him, and then forced her into swallowing a handful of pills. Just as Beverly watched him getting a wire ready to use on her, she lost consciousness. Robin sliced off one of her breasts with the wire and had made a significant way through the other breast when the men were interrupted. They threw Beverly out of the van into a dumpster and took off before they could be identified. A passerby found Beverly and got her to the hospital where she would eventually recover from her wounds. Beverly was able to give a detailed description of Robin and his red Dodge van, and her testimony led to the arrests of all 4 men.
Good.
Edward and Andrew quickly confessed to everything. Thomas also confessed when he was arrested a few days later, but Robin to this day remains adamant that he's innocent. Additional victims were mentioned in their confessions, but their remains have never been found. Robin admitted to kidnapping and assaulting Beverly, but claims that he'd never be able to live with himself if he'd actually murdered someone. The prosecution charged the other members of the Chicago Ripper crew with murder, seeking the death sentence for Edward and Andrew. Both would be found guilty. However, only Andrew would actually be executed. He became the last person to ever be executed in the state of Illinois. The weight of deciding on the validity of his sentence caused Governor George Ryan to commute every remaining prisoner on death row sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This effectively saved the life of Andrew's crewmate Edward, who is currently serving his sentence in Statesville, where he works repairing cars and cutting grass, and is reportedly a well-behaved prisoner. Thomas was offered life in prison without the possibility of parole as part of a plea deal for his detailed descriptions of events and his testimony. But through many legal manoeuvres, his legal team were able to get some of the charges against him dropped and got him a retrial for the charges of murder. Wanting to avoid going to court again, Thomas took a plea deal and was actually released from prison in 2019, which was when his probation period was over. Where he is right now is unknown, and seeing as the charges of sexual assault against him were dropped, he doesn't have to register as a sexual offender wherever it is that he now calls home. To round off today's episode and come back to the head of the beast, Robin GECHT remains the only member of the Chicago Ripper crew to never be charged and sentenced for murder. Investigators were unable to tie enough physical evidence to him to be able to prosecute him for murder, but they did use a mass of witness and character witness testimonies, as well as Beverly Washington's own account of her assault at Robin's hands, to paint him in a dark light and have him sentenced to 120 years in prison. To this day, he continues to maintain his innocence, even claiming that if investigators tested his DNA against those found at the crime scenes, then they would definitely find out that they had the wrong man. In yet another shocking twist of this case, Robin GECHT will be eligible for parole in 2042, meaning that there is a chance that he'll be back on the streets one day, even though he'll be 88 and will have to start his life again in a world where he has little family and even fewer friends left. That concludes today's case.
Bro.
Thanks for listening to the story about the Chicago Ripper crew. To every victim of this case, I'll be thinking of you.
R.I.P. to all the victims that lost their life. I'm glad they got caught. Like, I mean, fuck these guys, bro. Like, I mean, they are some piece of shit. Like, I mean, what the fuck, bro? Nah, like, that's just R.I.P. to the victims. I have nothing else to say. Check out the description if you guys want to check out for yourselves. Definitely check out the channel. That will be down in the description if you guys want to check it out. Definitely check out the channel. I think I'm going to try to get some more videos from this channel to react to. But let me know what you guys' thoughts are. RIP to the victims. I'll see you guys in the next reaction video. Stay safe. Positivity is key. Motivation is key. Happiness is key. You guys watch out for each other. I'll see you guys in the next video.